Lian Xi, known as an elderly leftover woman, was forced to go on a blind date to ease her brother's burden. However, this object was short, fat, ugly, and extremely insulting. In a fit of anger, she married a stranger. I thought I was just an ordinary person, but unexpectedly, I got married to my abstinence boss. Chapter 1. Obtaining Certificates. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Haicheng, night falls, and the lanterns begin to shine. Lian Xi looked at the bright and colorful bar sign in front of him, his beautiful eyebrows and eyes hesitating slightly. She lowered her head and glanced at the text message sent by her sister.in.law on her phone, confirming that it was correct here. This is the blind date location they arranged for her. Before coming, they even lied to her about some high-end Western restaurant. She let out a faint breath, and the words of her sister.in.law and mother still lingered in her ears in the afternoon. Lian Xi, you're 26 years old this year. You're already an elderly leftover girl. If you don't get married again, how can you make me look up in front of friends and relatives? My mother's voice was filled with resentment, and her ears were already starting to cocoon from hearing similar words. If it were just a mother, it would be fine, but unfortunately there is also a sister.in.law next to her who has a strange personality. Yeah, she, you're already big and big. You can't keep following me, your brother, and your parents all the time, can you? This house is just a little big, and your brother and I have children, so we can't squeeze you anymore. Hurry up and find someone to marry. They even arranged this blind date without leaving her any room for negotiation. With a self-deprecating curl of her lips, she slowly walked into the bar. The explosive music and colorful lighting made her feel uncomfortable. She patiently followed her sister.in.law's instructions and found her blind date. A man with a plain appearance and glasses looks quite gentle. After seeing her, the blind date looked at her up and down without hesitation, as if giving an estimate of the product, which made people uncomfortable. Dressing up like this at the bar is too tacky for you, isn't it? The man pursed his lips, clearly dissatisfied with her professional attire. Lian Xi frowned silently and sat down across from the man, suppressing his displeasure. Are you Lian Xi? Let me introduce myself. My name is Chen Fan and I am currently a senior executive at Haicheng Company. She smiled and didn't answer, and the man didn't care. He cleared his throat and continued speaking. I won't say much more nonsense. Your conditions are quite average. However, if you are willing to cook, do laundry, take care of your children at home, and pay all your wages after marriage, I can still reluctantly agree to marry you. After the words fell, Lian Xi's expression on his face couldn't hold. Her red lips curled in a beautiful curve, with a hint of mockery and a cold voice. If you're willing to do laundry, cook, and take care of your children, I'll give you a monthly salary of 10,000 yuan. Do you agree? Before the man could speak, she leisurely uttered a few words. You don't have strong abilities, but your ambition is not small. I don't think you're suitable for a blind date, you're suitable for finding a nanny. The man's face turned green and white as she spoke. He gritted his teeth and glared angrily at her, his tone light and wild. Relying solely on you. Do you still want me to work for a poor and ugly country bumpkin like you? I'm so comfortable that I don't have to do anything and can have a lot of money and women. What are you? He disdainfully glanced at the woman across from him, as if thinking of something, and lightly curled his lower lip. Actually, you can still look good. How about I introduce a few male clients to you? As long as you take care of them, you won't lose money. Lian Xi can't listen anymore. She stood up with a cold face and picked up her bag from her seat as if to leave. As soon as she turned around, her wrist was caught by someone. She turned around and glanced at the hand that the man was holding onto her, with a hint of disgust between her eyebrows and eyes. Let go. Her voice was cold, with a faint sense of oppression. After listening to her words, the man not only did not retaliate, but also increased his strength a bit. What kind of aloofness are you pretending to be after everyone comes out to play? If you want to leave, it's not impossible. After blowing off these few bottles of wine on the table, I'll let you go." He smiled ill-intently and let out a vulgar whistle, as if waiting to see her joke. With a furrowed brow, Lian Xi exerted a slight force and shook off the greasy and dirty hand. She took a tissue and gently wiped her delicate porcelain white wrist, casually glancing at the person across from her and speaking softly. "We are strangers who only met by chance because of blind dates. Are you sure you want to make things look so ugly?" Her cold words were nothing more than a bluff to the man. He snorted coldly and handed a bottle of wine to Lian Xi. "Stop pretending. If you know you're scared now, quickly drink this bottle of wine and apologize to me. My lord has a large amount, so it's not impossible to let you go." Lian Xi couldn't help but laugh angrily at his words. "It seems that it's dishonest not to fight anymore." She slightly moved her wrist, but just as she was about to take action, she took the lead and grabbed the bottle from the person's hand before hesitantly pouring it into his mouth. At the nearby staircase, Lu Silly quietly watched everything. He had just finished discussing business when he saw the person holding on to Lian Xi's wrist, clearly wanting to drink and not let anyone go. He wasn't originally a meddler, but he recognized Lian Xi as a senior executive in the operations department of an entertainment company he had just acquired. How could it be considered that he is also an employee of his own company? How could there be any reason to be bullied under his nose? Lu Silly casually loosened his shirt tie and lazily walked towards Lian Xi. Chen Fan had already been filled with 7 or 8 bottles of wine at this time, and his whole body was a bit disoriented. Xiao Li saw Lu Silly, who nodded slightly and gestured before he stopped drinking. Lian Xi only felt a burning gaze staring behind her. She turned around and met a pair of inexplicable deep-ink pupils. The man was dressed in a well-cut high-set suit, with a perfect figure of wide shoulders and narrow waist, slender eyebrows and eyes, a high and straight nose, and a luxurious yet somewhat lazy atmosphere. Judging from this posture, it should have been him who helped her just now. Lian Xi politely raised her lips, her beautiful fox eyes curved into crescent-shaped shapes. "Sir, thank you for helping me out," she said. Lu Silly gave her a meaningful glance and instead of matching her words, he asked in reverse, "Are you in a hurry to get married?" He just heard that she is on a blind date. Lian Xi was stunned for 2 seconds, although he didn't know why he asked, he still instinctively nodded. "Yes, my family is urging me to get married." She pursed her lips and silently looked at the man in front of her, his expression very dull. Lu Silly couldn't help but think of last week's family banquet. The old man urged him to quickly find a partner, get married and settle down before the age of 30, so that he could quickly embrace his great-grandson. And he is already 29 years old this year. He suddenly looked up at the woman across from him. She has a beautiful appearance, a graceful figure, and a cool and aloof temperament, exuding the dignified elegance of a lady in every move and gesture. It's actually a good choice. He took a few steps with his long legs and walked into her, gazing down at her clear and smiling fox eyes. After a pause of 2 seconds, he suddenly spoke with a whimsical voice that was magnetic and captivating. "If you just want to get married, why not consider obtaining a certificate from me?" Chapter 2. Dowry Money. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Lian Xi lightly blinked her sparkling eyes, with a hint of exploration in her eyes. She didn't rush to speak, but calmly looked at the other person. Lu Silly didn't urge her either, just stood there and let her see. 2 minutes later, with a faint smile on her face, she casually said, "All right, let's go get the certificate now." She tightened her right hand holding the bag, which now contained the household registration book that her sister-in-law had stuffed into before leaving. Her words left him slightly stunned, not expecting her to be so anxious. However, he has never been a procrastinator, and since he has decided to obtain the certificate, it doesn't make much difference whether it's early or late. The two of them drove to the Civil Affairs Bureau. Originally, they had already finished work, and I don't know what kind of relationship Lu Silly used. Anyway, the two of them successfully completed all the procedures. Lian Xi looked at the red notebook in his hand, which was printed with the 3 golden characters, marriage certificate, and realized that he was somewhat hasty. She doesn't know the other person at all. But tonight it was he who helped himself, and judging from his wealth or status, there shouldn't be any other intention towards her, right? Just as she looked down at her marriage certificate in a daze, a clear and cold voice sounded behind her. If I remember correctly, your name is Lian Xi, right? When she signed just now, he deliberately noticed that the surname Lian was quite rare. She turned to look at him, tilted her head slightly, her lips curved, and looked at the man in front of her with interest, Liu Xi. Coincidentally, she also took note of his name. Previously, the lights in the bar were a bit dim, and she didn't even have a chance to take a good look at the person in front of her. Now, there is a chance to take a good look. Under the light, the man's sword eyebrows and starry eyes, his facial features clearly defined, and Dan Feng's eyes looked cold and abstinent. Liu Xi raised his left hand to look at the watch, his gaze resting on her for a moment, and his thin lips lifted lightly. Miss Lian, after marriage, I hope both parties will not interfere too much with each other's work. Besides, everything is normal. Do you have any objections? She gave him a deep glance, her beautiful eyes full of spring, and a smile rolled up her lips. I don't have any objections, she said. The bright smile on the woman's face made him feel a bit dazed. I know she has a beautiful appearance, but up close, there is still a bit of coquettishness between her eyebrows and eyes, which effectively neutralizes her aggressive fox eyes. He nodded, with no unnecessary expression on his face, and reached out to greet Xiaoli. The latter immediately walked behind him and whispered, the meeting still has 30 minutes left. Mr. Liu, should we go to the company? Liu Xi calmly waved his hand, indicating that he knew. He turned his head to look at Lian Xi, his eyebrows elegant and noble, and his Adam's apple rolled slightly. I have something else to do later, so I'll leave first and let Xiaoli take you back. After speaking, he lifted his step and wanted to leave. Lian Xi's heart twitched slightly and he called out to him with a clear and beautiful voice. Mr. Liu, wait a moment, let's leave a contact information. He paused in his footsteps, only to be reminded by her that they were both married and had not received a phone call. Quickly, the two added WeChat and Liu Xi sent her a location. I currently live here regularly. You can move the things over first, and it will become our home in the future. If you don't like it, you can buy a new wedding house later. The man's tone carried a hint of reluctance, and after his last sentence, he walked out of the Civil Affairs Bureau with great strides. Lian Xi looked at Liu Xi's upright figure, pursed her red lips, and silently put her marriage certificate in her bag. Xiaoli parked his car at the bottom of Lian's apartment building, glanced at Lian Xi in the rearview mirror, and politely asked her if she had many things and if she needed his help. The person in the back seat stared out the window from the moment they got in the car, and only gradually regained consciousness when they heard the sound. She raised her eyes and smiled, gently and politely waving her hand. No need, could you please wait for me for a while? I need to go up and tidy up. Xiaoli smiled and opened the car door for her. Returning home, the mother was playing games with her grandson, while the sister-in-law sat on the sofa watching TV and munching on melon seeds. Seeing that she had opened the door, she rolled her eyes in frustration. Are you still willing to come back? It's so late, why don't you go cook? Let the whole family accompany you to drink the northwest wind. By listening to this tone, it's likely that she knew she had sex with that man with glasses, and she felt unhappy. Lian Xi suppressed her anger for a moment, frowned slightly, gave her a cold glance, and turned around to enter the kitchen. The female voice behind her was sharp, chattering incessantly. Living in someone else's house with no sign of being under someone else's supervision, remember to wash your clothes and clean the house after finishing your meal. Her hand stiffened as she opened the refrigerator, enduring it for a while before she could resist the urge to throw the bowl next to her on the face outside. Lian Xi tied her seaweed-like long hair in a bun at the back of her head, tied a bow on her tight waist with an apron, and skillfully prepared 4 dishes and 1 soup. The slender figure kept busy living at home, from the living room to the bedroom. Hanging all the washed clothes on the balcony to dry, she returned to the living room, took out her phone and marriage certificate from her bag, and placed them on the coffee table. She looked coldly at the woman on the sofa with a contented expression, her expression dull. "I'm married, I'll move out soon, and I won't live here again." Her voice was calm, without any ripples, as if she was recounting a seemingly trivial matter. Upon hearing her words, the person on the sofa froze for a few seconds, then threw the melon seeds in their hand onto the coffee table. Chen Yu looked up at her with a contemptuous expression and a strong tone of mockery. "Do you mean you got married in a flash? What about the money?" The mother, who had been silent all along, suddenly looked up at her, her eyes filled with disbelief. Xi, how could you not discuss such a big matter as getting married with your family?" Lian Xi glanced at his mother without speaking. Looking back at Chen Yu, she stared at the person on the sofa calmly, holding back her temper and asking, "What money do you want?" The woman held her hands in front of her chest, unable to resist the market atmosphere. She snorted heavily and naturally spoke up. "Of course it's the dowry money. Otherwise, my family would have taken care of you for free these years. You've been eating and drinking for free for so many years. The tone is rude and unreasonable." Lian Xi remained silent, but pursed her lips tightly, frowned and turned her head to look at her mother on the side, hoping she could speak. Over the years, she has been doing a lot of work at home, and at least half of the expenses are her responsibility. These mothers should know better than anyone else in their hearts. Upon receiving Lian Xi's questioning and hopeful gaze, her mother's lips moved and she hesitated for a moment, but ultimately lowered her head without saying a word. At home, she has never had much say, it is her son and daughter-in-law who make the decisions. Although Lian Xi had become accustomed to his mother's usual avoidance and cowardice, he couldn't help but be disappointed. Her eyes darkened and her heart was moist. The ringing of a mobile phone on the coffee table shattered the silence of the room. The caller display note is "Husband." Before Lian Xi could react, Chen Yu quickly snatched the phone from the table and hurriedly pressed the answer button. She gave Lian Xi a proud glare, coughed lightly, and deliberately controlled her tone. "Hello, I am Lian Xi's sister-in-law. Since you have obtained the certificate from her, you must give me the dowry money, right? You can't marry a wife for nothing without spending a penny, can you? If I don't see the dowry within 3 days, either I will divorce or I will sue you for marriage fraud." Chapter 3. One-time payment. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The phone remained silent for 2 seconds, followed by a deep and clear male voice. "How much do you want?" Chen Yu looked at Lian Xi, and a hint of impatience appeared on the woman's cold face, with a hint of warning in her eyes. She pondered for 2 seconds before speaking without hesitation, her voice rising 1 degree. 500,000, pay in full at once. Upon hearing this, Lian Xi felt it was outrageous, and he couldn't help but dare to speak up too boldly. The normal dowry for marriage is only 80,000 yuan, and even a little more won't exceed 200,000 yuan. How dare she come up and ask for 500,000 yuan? Sure, you can have Lian Xi answer the phone first. Upon hearing the man say yes, Chen Yu couldn't help but feel a little ecstatic. She wanted to say a few more words, but looking at Lian Xi's face, it seemed like she was about to pounce the next second. She reluctantly handed her phone. Taking her phone, she deliberately took 2 steps away and arrived at the balcony. Her fingers holding her phone were slightly graying, and her hair was also a bit disheveled by the wind. Her slightly curled hair lazily draped over her shoulders. "Sorry, Mr. Liu. My sister-in-law has always been rude and unreasonable. Don't worry, and don't take her words to heart. Her voice is light and her tone is warm and soft. Yu followed behind her all the time, and when he heard her words, he was furious and gave her a fierce look. Just got married and turned your elbow out. You're not married to a little white face, are you? You can't even afford this dowry money. She had a loud voice, and this sentence naturally drifted into the man's ear on the other end of the phone. Lian Xi heard Lu's silly chuckle lightly. When he spoke again, his tone was noticeably softer by a few degrees than before, and his magnetic voice sounded inexplicably secure. It's okay, I don't care. Can you handle it yourself? If not, just send me the card number. After pausing for 2 seconds, he added with a smile, your sister.in.law is not wrong. If you marry such a beautiful wife, it is also appropriate to give you some money as a gift. He doesn't understand the situation at her home, but he also doesn't want her to feel embarrassed at home. Moreover, things that can be solved with 500,000 yuan are not worth mentioning to him. His words warmed her heart, but she became even more ashamed and angry about her sister.in.law's shameless behavior. Lian Xi was so anxious that she was about to cry, afraid that he would really throw the money over. They just finished receiving their certificates tonight, why is she so embarrassed to ask for his money? No need. I can handle it myself. After speaking, she hung up the phone with a snap, giving the man no chance to refuse. She turned around and a hint of coldness appeared in the beautiful fox's eyes. Yu saw her face suddenly turn cold, and for no reason, she felt a little flustered. She nervously swallowed her saliva. Lian Xi lightly curled his lips and raised his eyebrows. She was 1 head taller than Yu, and now she was staring down at her from above. What is the custom of giving a dowry to my sister.in.law? Did you also give the dowry to your sister.in.law when you married my brother? Yu choked on her words and was about to retort when she coldly interrupted her. You're married to my brother, and half of the money for buying a house here is from me, and the other half is from our family. I don't care about you dragging your family around, and you're still kicking your nose and face. I've been holding you back for years, not because I'm afraid of you, but because I want my family to be more harmonious. Yu, it's best for you to be sensible. If you're not sensible anymore, don't blame me for turning your back and not recognizing people. After speaking so much in one breath, Yu was already frozen in place. Due to her emotional excitement, her breathing also quickened a lot, and her fair face turned rosy, looking more lively than before. For so many years, she has never complained at home, and Yu has forgotten that her sister.in.law has never been a soft persimmon that anyone can handle. It was Lian Xi who gave her too many good looks. After being stunned for 2 seconds, Yu suddenly pinched her thigh hard, covered her face, and burst into tears. As she cried, she turned around to hug the child and said, "What a sin. Ozawa, your aunt is going to kick us both out." Lian Xi sneered and watched as she pretended to take the child into the bedroom, only to hear the sound of the door lock falling. Mother stood up timidly from the sofa and spoke helplessly, She, your sister.in.law has this personality. Don't argue with her, Mom apologizes to you on her behalf. She shook her head indifferently, her lips slightly curved. Mom, I'm fine. After I leave, remember to call me if there's anything at home. After chatting with her mother and promising to bring her husband back to see them next time, she finally put down a dim sum. Lian Xi stood at the door of Yu's bedroom and raised his hand to knock on the door. Without any response, she frowned impatiently and increased her intensity. After a while, the door was opened by a crack, and Ozawa ran out of the room and threw himself into his grandmother's arms. Lian Xi took the opportunity to open the door and enter. Yu sat with his back to her in front of the makeup mirror, and there was no response to any movement. She didn't care either, spoke on her own, her voice as cold as ever. Don't think about my dowry, I won't take this house either. I was originally planning to leave it for my parents to live in. You can borrow it here, but you must take care of my parents. If they have any problems, you and my brother will move out immediately. I don't mind spending more money to hire a nanny. Putting aside her words, she was too lazy to take a second look and tisk before returning to her room. Her bedroom was renovated from a study, very small, but she cleaned it very clean. Lian Xi was tidying up his things bit by bit, somewhat reluctant. But in the end, she found that the place she had lived in for several years, when she moved out, all she needed to take with her was a suitcase. She looked at her white suitcase, which contained only a few sets of clothes, some cosmetics and skin-care products, a few pairs of shoes, and no other personal belongings. I have less luggage than staying at a hotel during a long trip. She self-deprecatingly pulled her lower lip, her slender eyelashes drooping slightly, inevitably feeling a bit sad. In the end, Lian Xi refused her mother's kindness to send her downstairs and left this home with a suitcase alone, which had been living for several years. Xiao Li saw her coming out of the hallway and immediately welcomed her, taking the suitcase from her hand. He was a bit surprised. After going up for so long, she only brought down a suitcase in the end. Getting into the car, Lian Xi took a deep breath and smiled awkwardly. I'm sorry for keeping you waiting for so long. Xiao Li is so flattered, how dare he accept the apology from the CEO's wife. He quickly glanced in the rearview mirror with a sincere expression, Madam, you're too polite. Lian Xi felt a bit uncomfortable with this title for a while, and her smile became a bit awkward. After about half an hour, the car drove into the underground garage. After opening the door according to the password given by Lu Xili, Lian Xi stood in the living room and surveyed the house. This is a city center level building with a great location in close proximity to the company. The decoration is a bit too monotonous, with a uniform black, white, and gray tone that looks a bit cold. However, it bears a striking resemblance to the temperament of the homeowner. Chapter 4 is too explosive. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Late at night, Lu Xili entered the door wrapped in a cold air, and the room was pitch black. He unconsciously relaxed his movements, loosened his tie with his right hand, and slowly walked into the bedroom. There is still a warm yellow wall lamp by the bedside, and the woman is sleeping on the other side with her back to the lamp. He walked over lightly, and under the dim light, her sleeping face was peaceful and peaceful. With a light sweep of his eyelids, he saw an extra white suitcase on the ground beside the bed. The box was half open and not closed, so he casually glanced at it. Clothes, shoes, and some women's daily necessities. Very little. It seems that this is probably all her belongings. He couldn't help but frown and immediately called Xiao Li. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, arrange for several high-end women's clothing designers to come over and customize several sets of clothes for Lian Xi, in various styles. The other end was stunned for 2 seconds, then quickly responded with a "good," and the phone hung up. Don't bother so much. He had just retrieved his phone when he heard the woman on the bed whimper, her voice soft and sticky as she spat out a few words. As soon as he turned his head, Lian Xi had already opened his eyes, and his sleepy appearance looked even more charming and naive than during the day. Her seaweed-like curly hair was scattered like clouds on the edge of her pillow, and the butterfly-like cilia cast a shadow under her eyes. Her rosy cherry lips were slightly parted like crabapple, and her breathing was light, revealing a fair and round shoulder. An indescribable hook. Especially her fox eyes. I don't know if it's because she just woke up, and when they looked at each other, it seemed like they were filled with tender emotions like water. It's almost like drowning him. Lu Xili's Adam's apple rolled slightly and he unconsciously swallowed, his eyes understanding. Seeing that he didn't react, Lian Xi moved his lips and wanted to say something more. Before she could open her mouth, her cool index finger covered her soft lips, blocking everything she had to say next. Husband and wife, how could you be in trouble? His voice has become much lower and more hoarse than usual, like a jar of aged wine, listening more magnetic and charming. She lifted her eyes and, without any surprise, caught a hint of lust in his eyes. The well-defined index finger flowed from her lips to her fair and delicate profile, and then a large hand clasped behind her head. The man exerted a slight force, and his cold and thin lips embraced the pink and delicate cherry lips. He lightly pecked and tasted them on her soft lips, rubbing them back and forth. Her eyes were slightly wide, her eyelashes trembled, and her body involuntarily tightened. Finally, she collapsed into a soft ball amidst his siege of the city. After the kiss, even the corners of Xi's eyes and eyebrows were tinged with a hint of redness, and he leaned softly against his arms, panting for breath. She doesn't have much experience in this area and doesn't know if everyone's heart beats faster when kissing. But intuition told her, no. What made her heart skip a beat was the person Lucille and his kiss. Replacing someone else would not have this effect. His hand caressed her spine in silk pajamas back and forth, and his knuckles brushed against the protrusions of the butterfly bone, causing a throbbing sensation. "Can we sleep together?" His voice became even more hoarse than before, as if deliberately suppressing surging emotions. They are both adult men and women, and even I can't help but understand the meaning of sleeping. Actually, the atmosphere was so good just now, he could have continued naturally. But he stopped, restrained and seriously asking for her opinion on whether it was acceptable. Lian Xi feels that he has been respected and valued. Two people are husband and wife, and it is only a matter of time before they have a relationship. She is not a little girl who is inexperienced in the world. She wants to work hard to manage this marriage and cultivate a relationship with him. And this approach is undoubtedly both fast and effective. After a moment of contemplation, she pressed her head against his shoulder and let out a muffled with a hint of imperceptible shyness. As soon as she finished speaking, Lian Xi felt a whirlwind and fell onto the soft big bed. The overwhelming kiss, mixed with the hot hormone breath of the man, rushed towards me. She couldn't help but close her eyes. Afterwards, she was carried into the bathtub in the bathroom, and the warm water soaked her whole body, relieving a hint of fatigue. She felt that the contrast between Lucille and being in bed was really extraordinary. Carrying a cold and ascetic image of the flower of the high mountains. In fact, the desire for dissatisfaction is very the next day. Lian Xi woke up as soon as the alarm clock rang. There was no one around her anymore. She glanced at her phone and saw his message on WeChat. "I'll go to work at the company first. Breakfast is hot in the kitchen, and I'll eat it before leaving after about 5 minutes." There was another message below that made her blush and ears turn red. "By the way, it was a bit harsh yesterday. I gave you some medicine. I'm sorry, I will pay attention next time." She was speechless with embarrassment and anger, unable to respond to his messages. She quickly changed her clothes and went to the bathroom to wash up. Looking in the mirror, Lian Xi realized that this person was simply a beast. Stretching down from the neck, numerous kiss marks spread throughout the body. She tried to cover the exposed skin on her neck with concealer, but to no avail. Finally, she reluctantly pulled out a scarf from the suitcase and tied it up, just enough to cover up those ambiguous marks. After finishing the meal, due to the closer distance, Lian Xi arrived at the company early. She brewed herself a cup of coffee and then focused on her work. Midway through, she went to the restroom. When she came out, she felt a bit hot and glanced at the empty bathroom. She took off her scarf, took some air, and changed to a looser tie. During this time, I couldn't help but mutter and curse a damn person in a low voice. This scene was captured by Tang Tian at the entrance of the restroom. She was a bit surprised and immediately understood, with a smile of unknown meaning on her heavily makeup-covered face. After finishing organizing, Lian Xi went out and felt that her colleagues were looking at her with a somewhat suspicious, exploratory, and disdainful gaze. Until she saw Tang Tian standing in front of her office door, she had a vague suspicion in her heart. Seeing Lian Xi, Tang Tian twisted her waist and walked towards her. Despite wearing high heels, she was still one head short in front of Lian Xi. Her eyebrows and eyes were filled with a small and successful expression, her lips were full of sarcasm, and her tone was filled with strong sarcasm. The supervisor is really competitive. In order to sit in this supervisor's position, should have accompanied the client to drink and sleep, right? Lian Xi frowned, his face calm and confident. She pulled her lower lip lightly and spoke without much warmth. Miss Tang, you can eat randomly, but you can't talk nonsense. If this kind of rumor spreads and causes any damage to the company's reputation, can you bear the responsibility? Tang Tian didn't expect her to use the company to suppress her, and her face turned a bit ugly. With a heavy snort, she looked at the soft white scarf around Lian Xi's neck and suddenly smiled. The next second, she reached out and forcefully pulled off the plain white silk. If you're not feeling guilty, why use a scarf to cover up these invisible marks? For a moment, everyone in the office stared at Lian Xi's slender jade neck and the kiss marks on it, looking a bit stunned. This is also it's so explosive. When Lu Silly came in, he happened to bump into the eerie silence of the office. He followed everyone's gaze and his sharp black eyes couldn't help but squint slightly. Chapter 5. Difficulties. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Noticing the commotion, the onlookers around turned their heads and silently made way for a path. The former boss of Xingxing couldn't help but frown and his eyelids twitched fiercely when he saw this posture. Today is the first day he brought the acquirer to inspect the company, and there has been such a minor disturbance. I don't know if the first party has any objections. After all, Lu Silly is notorious for being difficult to handle in the industry. He clenched his fist with one hand and coughed lightly while covering his mouth. The two people standing in the center couldn't help but turn back. When Lian Xi saw Lu Silly appear next to the former boss, he said it was fake if he wasn't shocked. Combined with the recent acquisition of the company, she could easily guess under what identity he came. Mr. Li, who was before Xingxing, squinted his eyes and smiled, clearing his throat. Let me introduce you to Mr. Lu Silly, who has acquired our company and will be your immediate supervisor in the future. Welcome everyone warmly. As soon as the words fell, the female employees present were clearly more excited than the male employees, and the wave of applause boiled fiercely. Seeing that the applause had no intention of stopping, Mr. Li reluctantly made a quiet gesture and stopped the applause from continuing. The most important thing is that in the future, Xingxing will be merged into the Lu Group and managed by a professional team sent by the Lu Group. These are some of the responsible directors of the Lu Group behind me. Mr. Li made way to the side, and the few people who came from behind were all elites in suits and leather shoes, including a woman who looked very capable. After everyone glanced at me, you all looked at me, I looked at you, big eyes staring small eyes. Lu Group. Is it the Lu Group they think of? At this point, someone who knew about it had secretly sent a message in the group that Lu Silly, the current president of the Lu Group, held an absolute controlling stake of 35%. Lian Xi naturally saw this news as well. Before she could even think about it, Tang Tian suddenly ran over to Lu Silly with her hand in hand. She had a self-proclaimed seductive smile on her face and spoke coquettishly. Mr. Lu, I want to report. There are people in the company who have behaved improperly, damaged the company's image, and now they are also implicated in the Lu Group. She said, her eyes intentionally or unintentionally glancing at Lian Xi. The latter had a calm and composed expression, allowing everyone to scrutinize him. Lu Silly lifted his eyelids with great interest and glanced at the delicate little face of the woman, which remained unchanged. His thin lips gently spat out two words, carrying a strong sense of interest. Who is it? Tang Tian rolled her eyes proudly, pointing at Lian Xi with one hand across the air, in a contemptuous tone. It's her, Lian Xi. And not only is she behaving improperly, but she also maliciously runs on colleagues in the company by seducing party A to the top. After speaking, she looked up at Lu Silly and quickly lowered her head, flattening her mouth. A confident and aggrieved expression of anger. Tang Tian, shut up. Don't talk nonsense in front of Mr. Lu. Before Lu Silly could speak, Mr. Li, who was standing on the side, became anxious first. His eyebrows furrowed tightly and he looked at Tang Tian with a calm expression, warning in his eyes. Suddenly, a sneer came from behind. The sound of high heels came over calmly, and Lian Xi curved his lips, smiling coldly. He walked elegantly and casually across from Tang Tian. The eyes with a smile that didn't reach the bottom of their eyes looked straight at her without any hesitation, and Lian Xi chuckled lightly. Do you have any evidence of my misconduct? Speaking empty words, slander are subject to legal responsibility. She had a smile in her voice, but even discerning people could tell that Lian Xi was already a bit angry. Tang Tian felt a moment of fear in her heart, but she didn't want to fall behind in front of Lian Xi. She curled her lips and pointed at the kiss mark on Lian Xi's neck, her eyes provocative. These things around your neck are the best evidence. If you're not being guilty, why cover them up? They're just afraid others will find out. After listening to her words, the smile on Lian Xi's face became more and more obvious, with a hint of thought-provoking meaning. Her gaze casually passed over the man across from her, only to see that his phoenix-shaped eyes were becoming more and more prominent, with a hint of mockery and playfulness. She curled her lips and cast her gaze back at the proud woman in front of her, feeling that she was incredibly foolish. She calmly flicked her broken hair around her ear, revealing delicate diamond earrings, speaking in a flirtatious tone. I just got married yesterday, why? Do I still need to report my personal matters to you? A light and ethereal sentence, but a heavy bomb was dropped in the office. Tang Tian looked at her incredulously, opened her mouth, but didn't say a word for a long time. Gradually, employees began whispering softly below. I got my certificate yesterday and came to work today. Even she is too dedicated. Yes, but she has always been so dedicated. Every day, she comes earlier than others and leaves later than others. I am truly the supervisor of the company. If it were me, I would definitely not be able to do it. Listening to the voices of others admiring Lian Xi, Tang Tian's face turned green and white. She wanted to say something more to save herself some face, but Lu Silly, who had been silent all along, suddenly spoke up. Her lacquered black eyes shot straight at her, with a cold voice and a strong sense of oppression. Alright, that's it for today. I don't want to hear any rumors or gossip in the company from now on. Starting from today, the atmosphere of Xingxing should also be positive. After saying these words, his scrutinizing gaze swept around the crowd before finally falling on Tang Tian. Starting from today, you can go home and later go to the HR department to collect this month's salary. He didn't leave her any face at all. Frankly speaking, without showing any mercy. Tang Tian was stunned. She realized that she had been opened up and wanted to plead for her again, but when her eyes touched those icy cold eyes, she dared not speak again. After speaking, Lu Silly glanced at Lian Xi for the last time and then took the lead in walking into the conference room. Although he didn't smile, she could clearly feel that his expression was much softer. After solving a farce, Lian Xi returned to his seat and a message popped out with a ding sound on WeChat. Husband. Why didn't you reply to my message? Lian Xi was momentarily stunned when he saw this news, and then remembered the one he saw this morning. Her slender fingers lightly tapped the screen a few times before clicking send. I woke up in a hurry this morning and forgot. She selectively ignored the previous sentence and simply revealed it with a light, forgot. Lu Silly remained silent for a moment, seemingly pondering the authenticity of her words, before sending a message. Husband. I booked a restaurant for lunch. Chapter 6. Movements. You are listening at novelfull.audio. His meaning is already very clear. Lian Xi pursed her lips, hesitated for a moment, and finally agreed. Okay, see you at noon then. After she finished saying this, she reached out and rubbed her slightly flushed face, regaining her energy to start today's work. Although the company has been acquired, the job responsibilities have not changed. With Lian Xi's ability, completing these tasks is a very simple task, but it still cannot withstand the increase in workload. She was immersed in her work all morning, completely unaware of the passage of time. "Supervisor, it's already noon. Aren't you going to eat yet?" Colleagues passing by immediately felt admiration when they saw her working so hard. "I truly deserve to be the supervisor. No wonder I have worked extremely hard and have strong abilities to reach this position, which is unmatched by people like them. I'm not hungry yet. You go eat first, I'll go later." Lian Xi's calm and indifferent face showed a shallow smile, but his hand movements did not slow down at all. After typing the last word on her hand, she finally breathed a long sigh of relief. The colleague who was just here has already left, and the entire office is empty, leaving her alone. Lian Xi rubbed his slightly sore neck, and when he looked up, he saw a tall figure standing in front of him, which made him momentarily stunned. "I was busy dealing with these things just now and forgot the agreement." She remembered the message that Lu Xili had just sent her, and suddenly felt a sense of guilt in her heart. After all, she is not the kind of person who likes to stand up for others, so she naturally feels embarrassed when she stands up for Lu Xili's pigeon. "It's okay, I just saw that you haven't come out for so long. Come and take a look." Lu Xili didn't think there was anything wrong with it, even though Lian Xi was still his employee. The employees of their own company have such enthusiasm, which of course satisfies them, not to mention that this person is still his wife. Lian Xi could see that he really didn't have any angry thoughts, so he breathed a sigh of relief. She is not worried about what Lu Xili will do to her. When we met before, we already knew that he was not such a person, but she still has some concerns about whether his mood will be affected by this. This time should still be possible. Lu Xili glanced at the watch on his wrist and took a step towards the side. His well-defined palm extended and placed it directly in front of Lian Xi. "Let's go." Although Lian Xi had already been delayed for a long time when he first dealt with things, their company still had a long lunch break, so there was still enough time to have a meal. Lian Xi reached out and placed his hand on Lu Xili's big hand, and stood up with this force. "Okay." Her usual bright color, which was suppressed by coldness, now burst out with a smile. She doesn't know how beautiful she looks now, but only Lu Xili can see this scene now. Lu Xili concealed his emotions and took Lian Xi to the restaurant he had booked. According to his identity, the level of this restaurant cannot be lower. This restaurant may not be very upscale, but it is also a place that Lian Xi usually doesn't venture into. She has never paid so much attention to her desire for words, and there are people like her sister-in-law around her. If she sees her, she is afraid that there will be many troubles in the future. "Hello, may I ask if this is Mr. Lu?" The waiter at the door saw Lu Xili bringing someone and immediately welcomed him. "The previously booked private room is ready, and you can go now." Lu Xili led Lian Xi and nodded lightly at the waiter. "Take us over." He can also be considered as bringing a woman here for the first time. After all, he has not had any contact with other women before, and this is also his first time. Lian Xi, who rarely came to such a place, was only slightly surprised and then regained his normal expression. She is not someone who has never seen the world before. After all, she has already become a supervisor and has attended some banquets, so she is not unfamiliar with such scenes. Moreover, if she comes out to discuss work with Party A, most of them choose to be in such a place, so she is also very comfortable following Lu Xili's side and walking inside. What only made her a little uncomfortable was that Lu Xili's identity was too prominent. No matter where he goes, there will always be a lot of people's eyes following him in this way, which is the charm he carries with him. This charm is not only effective for others, but also for Lian Xi. They walked to the private room and then sat down face to face. "What do you want to eat?" "Take a look, I can do anything." Lu Xili handed the menu at hand to Lian Xi, with a rare gentleness on his face. They only received the certificate yesterday, and it is normal for them to not understand each other's preferences. Instead of letting him choose some dishes that she doesn't like, it would be better for her to choose them herself. When Lian Xi heard him say so, he was naturally not too polite. They are all married now, no matter what the reason is, they are already tied together. If you have to hesitate for half a day even after eating, it's better not to agree to eat together from the beginning. Lu Xili was a bit surprised by her reaction, but more satisfied. He has seen too many twisted women before, so there haven't been any women around him in these years. Just talking about his identity, this is already a very rare thing in the circle, not to mention that he himself is seen as a golden turtle son.in.law by everyone. This makes this matter even more rare. Lian Xi took the menu and casually ordered a few dishes he liked, then handed the menu back to Lu Xili. Although she didn't have a strong appetite, speaking it out now was a bit disappointing, so she only ordered a few dishes. Unexpectedly, as soon as Lu Xili took the menu, he handed it directly to the waiter beside him, that's all. He doesn't have any ideas about his own dishes, he just cares more about Lian Xi's ideas. Lian Xi's heart was touched by an unknown emotion. She didn't feel this kind of feeling at home before, but just a flash marriage partner she had only known for a few days would already care about her feelings. While this moved her heart a bit, there was also an indescribable sadness. Lu Xili keenly felt the low mood of the woman in front of him, but he didn't have the intention to pry into Lian Xi's thoughts now. He lifted his thin lips lightly and then brought up another matter. Chapter 7. Evening Party. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Tomorrow I have a party and I'm missing a female companion. Can you join me? Of course, you don't have time. His eyes were deep, and he looked straight at Lian Xi with a magnetic voice. Actually, I still want you to be my female companion. He spoke without beating around the bush and directly revealed his own situation. Facing his wife, he doesn't need to have those extra thoughts. Since you have already chosen to marry Lian Xi, you naturally need to have some trust. If there is no trust between the couple, then the rest of your life is even less important. What time is tomorrow? Lian Xi pursed her lips, her red lips curved into a smile, making her appear less reserved. She has also attended similar banquets with her boss before, but it is obvious that her boss is completely different in level from Lu Xili. Even her previous boss was not worth looking at in front of Lu Xili. I will have the driver pick you up tomorrow evening. Lu Xili looked up at her with a soft gaze. I will let you finish work early, and the driver will take you to arrange things tomorrow. After seeing Lian Xi's suitcase yesterday, he already knew how much clothing she had. If it's a normal situation, it may be okay, but now we have to go to a banquet, so having these clothes alone is not enough, and some things that should be purchased should still be purchased. This time, Lian Xi has nothing to say. She refused Lu Xili's preparation last night only because she felt that those clothes were enough, but now the scene she has to face is different, and those clothes are naturally not enough. Okay. She spoke softly and agreed directly. A boss spoke up, and as an employee, she certainly has no worries. Lu Xili was not surprised to hear her answer, as if it was within his expectations. At this moment, there were two knocking sounds at the door, knocking, followed by the voice of the waiter, Mr. Lu, the dishes are ready. Are you serving them now? Come on in. Lu Xili reached out and tugged at his tie, opening his mouth to let in the waiter outside. It has to be said that expensive restaurants have a reason for being expensive, otherwise there wouldn't be so many people coming here. After all the dishes were served, the atmosphere on the table fell silent for a moment. Neither of them is the kind of person who likes to talk while eating, so for a moment, there was no other sound on the table except for the slight tapping of bowls and chopsticks. This meal was eaten very quickly, which is related to Lian Xi not ordering a few dishes himself, but fortunately they were all full. Because the relationship between Lian Xi and Lu Xili was not exposed, she chose to take a step first. She doesn't want what happened in the morning to happen again, although she doesn't have any special feelings, it will still have a slight impact on her work. As long as she doesn't actively seek trouble, everything else will go naturally. Lu Xili watched her leave behind her with a deep gaze. As soon as Lian Xi returned to the company, he immediately began his intense work. She spends most of her time working, except for necessary rest time. Unlike what Tang Tian said before, her supervisory position has nothing to do with those dirty transactions, all of which were obtained through her efforts. This is evident to everyone in the company. Except for people like Tang Tian, all other colleagues admire Lian Xi's attitude. In the workplace, it is common to see people who work very hard and seriously, but it is really difficult to see supervisors like Lian Xi who are so serious that they forget to eat and even take the initiative to work overtime. Supervisor, there is a document here that requires you to. Supervisor, I have. Almost everything they don't know or need help with, they will come to find Lian Xi. Although Lian Xi looks cold, she almost always answers anyone who has something to ask. She doesn't actually have much work, but she has to review the documents of her subordinates, so she will be even busier. Just leave it there. She calmly looked at the computer screen and once again bid farewell to her colleague who was looking for her. By the time she finished work, it had already been a long time, and she even unconsciously added another shift, but this time it was discovered early and there were still many people in the company. With a beep from the nearby phone, it seems that there is a message coming from WeChat. She rubbed her sore neck, picked up her phone, and unlocked the lock screen. Husband. Have you finished work yet? Lian Xi was a bit puzzled, but he still replied seriously. Just finished work, is there anything important? She didn't know what would happen if Lu Xili approached her, but if there was really something very important, she still had to ask. Husband. There's nothing important, I'm worried you might forget to eat again. His words were very straightforward, without any beating around the bush. When Lian Xi saw this sentence, he felt as if he had suddenly been scalded, and his face turned a little red. This incident rarely happens to her, and only a few times have it been due to Lu Xili. She has never been good at dealing with people's frank kindness, which may be related to her interpersonal relationships and family. But to be honest, she had never encountered such a straightforward concern before, and even her mother rarely saw such pure kindness in her. Her mother has always been towards her brother and sister. Law. Although she got used to it later on, it was her mother after all, and she still felt a bit sad in her heart. Don't worry, I'm ready to leave work now. See you later. Lian Xi's slender and fair fingers tapped the screen a few times and typed a line of words. She should have finished almost as well. Today's task has already ended. The rest time should be a time to rest, and she knows this better than anyone else, so once she finishes her work, she mostly won't continue to be busy. Unless there is too much work, she will only be a little late if she needs to work overtime. The person across from Lu Xili didn't know if he was busy, but it took him a long time to reply with a word, good. The next day, Lian Hai finished his work early. After all, Lu Xili had plans today, and since she had already agreed, she naturally had to prepare well. Fortunately, yesterday he knew that her place was not very comfortable, so he didn't do those things again. Although it is like this, the marks on her body are still very obvious. Chapter 8. Mr. Lu's Wife. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Lian Xi took out the concealer pressed on the bottom of the box early in the morning and covered all the traces. Although this may not necessarily cover it all, it can make these marks less obvious, so it won't make others' eyes all focus on her neck. The driver of Lu Xili also arrived very punctually. As previously agreed, he arrived here at exactly 4 o'clock. Madam, get in the car. The driver opened the back seat door very gentlemanly and respectfully let her in. His attitude really makes Lian Xi a little uncomfortable. She has never encountered such treatment before. But fortunately, she has been staying in Lu Xili's house for 2 days these days, and she has become a bit familiar with this title for a while. At least she won't be as bad as she used to be at the beginning. It's hard. Lian Xi pursed his lips, revealing a rare and serene smile. She is not the kind of person who tends to be very friendly towards outsiders, and if she gets angry, it's a different story. However, in most cases, she is not someone who enjoys talking to others very much. She is a completely different person at work, and in life she is a different person. The driver was clearly a bit surprised, but then lowered his head in admiration. "Madam, it's just my duty," he said. As the driver of Lu Xi, he actually took over many people. Although there were not many women among them, there were very few people who could be as beautiful and gentle as his wife. Most of the time, you will encounter such a beautiful person, and most of the time, their temper is not very good. So it's normal for him to be surprised when he sees Mrs. Lian Xi so kind now. The driver conscientiously took her to the place arranged by Lu Xi. After getting off the car, Lian Xi realized that this was the location of one of the most famous styling teams in the city. It is said that only those who are either wealthy or wealthy can enter here. If they are just ordinary people, they cannot receive such treatment. After all, the expenses here are really huge, and without money, it would be of no use. Of course, there is also a VIP system here, but most of it is something that the wealthy will have. Lian Xi looked at the building in front of him and his footsteps hesitated a bit. She has never set foot in such a place before, and of course, she doesn't know what the rules are here, so she naturally doesn't feel too embarrassed to go in directly. The driver noticed her concerns and added, "Mr. Lu is already fully prepared. Madam just needs to go in and report Mr. Lu's name, and someone will guide you." As a driver, he naturally knows the identity of his wife, but no matter how much she is now the owner of the Lu Group, there won't be those who don't have eyes who want to take action against her. "I know." Lian Xi's expression softened a lot when he heard what he said. "Thank you." Her "thank you" statement is sincere and not at all false. She is not the kind of fragile and sensitive person herself. If she were really that kind of person, now she would probably feel that the driver looks down on her. The driver heard her say this and waved his hand repeatedly. "I was just following Mr. Lu's instructions. If Madam wants to thank you, then thank Mr. Lu." He dare not take any credit for it. After all, it was arranged by Lu Xi himself, so he naturally has no reason to accept gratitude. Upon hearing him say so, Lian Xi naturally put this matter aside for now. She obediently followed the driver's instructions and directly said Lu Xi's name upon entering. Sure enough, someone came to take her inside. "May I ask if you are Mr. Lu's wife?" The waiter leading the way had a curious expression on his face, with no hint of disdain in his eyes. Lu Xi has been here many times and can almost be called a regular guest. This is the first time he has invited a woman to come here for styling in his own identity, which is naturally very curious. Although Lu Xi is very handsome and wealthy, they all have foresight, which is why Lu Xi likes to come here. No one will dislike conscious people, and being constantly entangled is also a very annoying thing. That's why he chose this place with fewer people. "Yes," Lian Xi answered decisively, without any intention of concealing anything. She didn't think there was anything to hide about this matter. Being with Lu Xi was a dream for many people. Although she wasn't that kind of person, it didn't stop her from thinking that being with Lu Xi was a commendable thing. "Then you must be very affectionate." The waiter's face showed an expression of envy, but it was just pure envy. "Why do you say that?" Lian Xi asked curiously, frowning slightly. "Where did you see it from?" She has never appeared here with Lu Xi before, and even this is her first time here, but the waiter said so. There must be some places that look like love. When she thought about it, she suddenly remembered the marks on her neck that were not completely concealed. Her face suddenly felt a warmth, and her neck and ears also turned slightly red, giving her a shy appearance. But the little girl next to her did not notice this at all, and even said enthusiastically, "Madam, you don't know that Mr. Lu has never brought anyone else besides his mother. You are the first one." She looked full of secrets and said, "It seems that Lu always likes Madam very much." The little girl's excited expression made even she feel embarrassed to reveal that she and Lu Xi had only met the next day. So she nodded, indicating that what she said was right. After receiving a positive response, the little girl was immediately satisfied. They quickly arrived at the place where the styling was done. This place is very large, it can already be said to be spectacular. If Lian Xi still lives in her previous house now, her small room may only take a dozen or so to cover the area here. Not to mention the dazzling array of clothes and jewelry here, which she couldn't even see. You can sit here for a while, and a stylist will come over later. The little girl took her to a place to make it and then left. Lian Xi sat on the chair for a while, but before the stylist arrived, he saw the figure of Lu Xili first. "Why did you come? Aren't you?" She stood up with a puzzled expression on her face. After all, yesterday Lu Xili didn't even mention coming together, he just said that Sikhan would come to pick her up. Chapter 9. This is my lady. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Lu Xili calmly looked up at her with a soft gaze and said, "I'm also going to attend the banquet tonight, so come and try the look." After he succinctly stated his future intentions, he turned to ask about Lian Xi. "You haven't chosen your style yet, or haven't you started choosing yet?" Although he doesn't know much about Lian Xi, he can still tell what kind of personality she is through these 2 days of contact. If he hasn't prepared yet, it's only possible that he hasn't started choosing yet. He guessed very accurately, and even she pursed his lips before finally telling the truth. "I haven't been here long, so the stylist hasn't come to see me yet." She didn't think the stylist would intentionally neglect her at all. After all, she didn't reveal any other information about what she had just said to the little girl. Normally, no one would disrespect Lu Xili's wife. So this matter is completely impossible. "Come with me over there." Lu Xili's eyes were not deep, but when he looked at Lian Xi, it was inexplicably affectionate. If it weren't for her knowing that she only met Lu Xili yesterday, she would probably feel that Lu Xili really likes her now. But she had self-awareness and reason didn't take this matter to heart, but her heart was always beating against her reason. She didn't know what her current emotions were, but she knew that she only had feelings for Lu Xili before. Her heartbeat was so fast that it almost jumped out of her chest. Lu Xili looked at her and then gave a faint smile. "Let's go, my lady." He has a gentle tone of voice, and if he were seen by his usual subordinates, he would probably be surprised now. Usually, his appearance is not so easy to talk about, let alone so gentle. Lian Xi's expression was a bit shy, but he still answered with a strong and calm voice. She didn't know that Lu Xili's usual appearance wasn't like this, she had only seen him like this before, so her impression of him was naturally the same. "Hello Mr. Lu." Almost as soon as Lu Xili appeared, many people turned their gaze to their side, making even she a bit uncomfortable. Her appearance is very aggressive, but standing next to the indifferent Mr. Lu, it doesn't look so obvious. Even their appearance seems to be a perfect match, making people couldn't help but praise them. They truly deserve to be a pair of talented people. But not many stylists came up, on the contrary, only a woman who looked very charming came up. "Mr. Lu rarely brings people here." The woman smiled seductively at Lian Xi, causing her to unconsciously shake her mind. It has to be said that this woman has a bit more charm than Lian Xi. Lian Xi's temperament is still a bit cold, otherwise she would probably be even more charming than this woman. "This is my wife." Lu Xili's expression remained unchanged, only indicating Lian Xi's identity. "You can give her a few outfits today." His attitude towards women was very cold, but when he turned his head to Lian Xi, his voice unconsciously softened. "This is Lillian. Let her help you with the styling today. Her skills are quite good." He said it is obvious that Lillian is his acquaintance, otherwise she wouldn't have come up alone. But Lillian looked very surprised, although this surprise was quickly concealed, it was still visible to Lian Xi. "You are Mrs. Lu," Lillian smiled immediately after being surprised. "Indeed, she looks extremely beautiful. It's normal for you to always take down Lu." Her tone was full of admiration, without any false elements. Although her words were a bit exaggerated, even I could tell that she had no ill intentions or that sinister tone. I'm flattered. She was a bit uncomfortable, but she still tried her best to show a smile. I'm telling the truth, don't believe me. Lillian smiled, with less charm on her face and more seriousness. What style of styling do you want? She seems to be a bit more serious about her work now, and she looks quite reliable. I can do anything. Lian Xi doesn't have much concept about these things, but since she is someone recognized by Lu Xili, there must be something extraordinary about it, so she is very confident in leaving these matters to her. Lillian frowned slightly, pondered for a moment, and then her eyes suddenly lit up. I know. Wait for me for a while, I'll be back soon. After speaking, Lian Xi saw her figure rushing into a room, probably to get something. She was a bit stunned and turned her head slightly to look at the man sitting on the sofa next to her. Lu Xili's long legs were slightly bent, and in contrast to this small sofa, there was a hint of pity. Lillian is a bit impulsive, but her aesthetics are pretty good, you don't have to worry. Lu Xili's tone was very light, but it immediately calmed Lian Xi's mood. She is not usually like this person, but she has encountered a lot of things in the past few days, so she doesn't know what to do. I believe in you. She pursed her lips, and a faint smile appeared on her once bright face, making her fox eyes appear even more innocent. Lillian quickly walked out of the room. When she came out, she was still holding a red cloth in her hand, which seemed to be a skirt. When Lian Xi saw her coming out, he stopped chatting with Lu Xili and just turned his head to look at her. I believe Mr. Lu will be amazed later. Lillian looked very confident, almost guaranteed by patting her chest, which was completely different from her appearance. She didn't wait for Lian Xi to react, so she immediately took the makeup tools and took her to the dressing room. She always moves very quickly, almost before even she could react, she was already taken to the dressing room. Lu Xili didn't follow up either, just sat on the sofa outside waiting for them to finish. As soon as he was away, Lian Xi's emotions became a bit nervous, but the woman in front of her looked too harmless, so she slowly let go of her guard. Lillian's movements are indeed incredibly fast, just a matter of 10 minutes. After she finished putting on her makeup, she handed the things that were placed aside to Lian Xi. Sure enough, there was no accident. This piece of cloth was just a red dress, which had not yet fully unfolded, so Lian Xi didn't know what this dress looked like. Chapter 10. Amazing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. But her usual clothes are in a very cool style, and there are hardly any bright colors that appear. Actually, it's not that she doesn't like it herself, it's just that if she buys clothes in these colors, her sister.in.law will probably talk a lot of gossip. So she didn't buy clothes in those colors, and mostly wanted to avoid those troubles. If it weren't for her mother always being towards her brother and sister.in.law, she wouldn't have felt such a sense of oppression and dependence. Go put it on, I'm sure Mr. Lu won't be able to take his eyes off it later. Lillian was so confident that she wished she could put on her clothes and go out to show Lu Xili now. Lian Xi didn't speak, but it was evident that she was a bit shy. She reached out and held the dress in her hand, then turned around and went to the nearby fitting room. Lillian's aesthetics and craftsmanship are indeed very good. When she first looked in the mirror, she already had a feeling. Her makeup technique is already very professional. If it weren't for her own face, she would be a bit confused about who the person in the mirror is. Lu Xili sat outside for a long time before seeing the two figures gradually approaching. He squinted his eyes slightly and took a closer look, then suddenly became somewhat stunned. Lillian's expression was very proud, she seemed to think she had done something terrible. She pulled the people around her to Lu Xili, her face full of pride, and said, Mr. Lu, look, isn't it simply unparalleled in beauty? It is obvious that she saw Lu Xili's stunned expression, which is why she exhibited such behavior. Otherwise, she would not have acted so clearly towards Lu Xili under normal circumstances. Lian Xi's expression was still calm, but she was actually looking forward to Lu Sili's reaction in her heart. She doesn't care about other people's opinions, but if it were Lu Sili's opinion, she would still be a bit concerned. It looks great. If you like it, you can keep wearing it. Lu Sili lifted his thin lips lightly and looked at Lian Xi, dressed in a red dress, with deep eyes that revealed amazement. Lian Xi's current appearance is indeed stunning, no wonder it makes Lillian so excited. They are stylists who really enjoy creating designs for good-looking people. If it's someone like Lu Sili and Lian Xi, they are most satisfied. After all, if you create a look for someone who looks good, then the next result will make people very proud. No one would dislike beautiful things, let alone them. Lian Xi looked at their appearance and suddenly became a little curious, so he turned around and walked towards the mirror not far away. She is now eager to see herself. However, when she walked up to the mirror and saw her current appearance clearly, she was also somewhat surprised in her heart. This is what she has never seen before, her own appearance. Lian Xi's skin was already very white, and now it was highlighted by the red dress on her body, making her skin even whiter like snow. Not to mention that she is still wearing the makeup that Lillian put on her face now, her already beautiful features are depicted in more detail, her red lips slightly curled, and a pair of fox eyes appear even more alluring. However, the emotions in her eyes are cold, and this contrast adds a touch of contrasting charm. No wonder they were stunned, even when she saw it herself, she felt a bit dazed. She's not without wearing a red dress, but she looks so beautiful, which can be considered her first time. Lu Sili said before that Lillian's skills are good, but it's not just a casual remark. Her every stroke seems to have been carefully designed, amplifying the advantages of her already perfect facial features. Although this is related to Lian Xi's good appearance, there is still her credit for it. Lu Sili did not conceal the amazement and subtle emotions in his eyes, but it made Lian Xi couldn't help but feel shy. Her hair was tied into a perfectly shaped bun, with some scattered hair on her cheeks, making her look even more charming. Not to mention that due to her shyness, her cheeks are slightly pink and she is gradually spreading towards her neck, which makes Lu Sili feel a bit dry and tongueless. The one you're wearing now looks very nice and fits you very well. His gaze was deep and calm, even though he was a cold and composed person. But now, looking at Lian Xi's gaze, it was as if a large beast had set its sights on its prey, as if it was about to devour her in the next second. Since Lian Xi's styling has been completed, it's now Lu Sili's turn. A man has a tall physique, and his legs are not very long, let alone his appearance. No matter where he is placed, even in the entertainment industry, he has a place. So all of his styling came to an end quickly, mostly just getting his hair done and choosing suits, so there was nothing else left. Men's dressing up is not as troublesome as women's, so it can be easily finished. How's it going? Lu Sili walked over to Lian Xi in a black suit and lowered his eyes to look at her seriously. He lifted his thin lips lightly and said, "Does it look good?" There was actually no expression on his face, but Lian Xi felt that she could see a hint of nervousness from this handsome and unattractive face. She was stunned for a moment, then carefully glanced at his outfit and said, "It looks very nice." Lian Xi's sparkling eyes looked straight at him and said, "I think it suits you very well. You look very handsome in it. Of course, if you want to try other styles yourself, you can take a look." Her praise was very sincere, and when her beautiful eyes looked at Lu Sili, they were all his reflections. At this moment, Lu Sili had an illusion that she was like her whole world. This illusion made him feel a bit strangely happy, but he didn't show it in person. "Don't waste time, you said it looks good, so that's it." His tone was light, "Let's go, it's almost time." Lian Xilin could hear a hint of happiness from his calm words, and it was obvious that his mood had improved significantly. Okay. She had no objections to this matter and wanted to follow Lu Sili as soon as she mentioned her skirt. But the next second, her slender waist was grabbed by a pair of scorching hands, and the warmth of these hands made her tremble uncontrollably. The culprit had a calm expression on his face and said, "Let's go, the driver is already waiting outside. I don't want others to wait long. But it doesn't mention anything I did just now." The car stopped in front of a magnificent hotel, and the driver opened the car door.